My name is Rabbi David Schwartz, and I am thrilled to introduce this evening's program, Living a Religious Life as a Transgender Jew, a Halachic Conversation. According to Pew Research, nearly 90% of Orthodox Jews say that religion is an important part of their lives. It is not surprising that many transgender Jews, especially those who have grown up within the Orthodox community, are interested in living a religiously meaningful life. The binary gender separation of many Orthodox spaces, however, sometimes presents a challenge to transgender Jews. And this challenge can be intensified when questions are asked to unsympathetic authorities who are suspicious about a questioner's motives. I believe that ambiguities regarding gender or sexual preference should not preclude anyone's participation in the Orthodox community. Indeed, this is the message in this week's Torah portion, Bo, as Paro offers to send out the men to worship God, and Moshe insists that everyone be included, irrespective of age or gender. This perspective motivates our program tonight. This evening, we will hear from the ideal participants for a conversation regarding halachic issues faced by transgender Jews attempting to live an Orthodox lifestyle. Yaakov is a college freshman who spoke on our last panel, which addressed the need for Jewish day schools to be welcoming to LGBTQ students. Yaakov is a trans man who finds deep personal meaning in living an observant Orthodox life. Unfortunately, as we heard last time, he has occasionally been faced with rabbis who questioned his identity and were less than welcoming. Tonight, Yaakov will be in conversation with a rabbi well known for providing halachic answers with a sense of compassion and concern, Rabbi Dov Linzer, president and Rosh HaYeshiva of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. Rabbi Linzer serves as religious guide and mentor to the yeshiva's over 150 musmachim in the United States and over 60 rikma rabbis and rabbaniot in Israel. Whether you identify as LGBTQ, consider yourself an ally, or have questions, thank you for spending your time with us. Thank you as well to Eshel and Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, Porat's partners in tonight's event, and to our co-sponsors, JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, Uri L'Tzedek, and Yeshivat Maharat. Tonight's program will contain two parts. Yaakov and Rabbi Linzer will begin with a conversation. While they will primarily be talking to one another, with you having a chance to listen in, they will occasionally address the audience to provide background and to highlight particular points. When they finish their conversation, Sonny Epstein will share some important information regarding Eshel and moderate a Q&A based on the questions that you submit during the program. Yaakov and Rabbi Linzer, thank you for joining us this evening, and I turn things over to the two of you.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here. Yaakov?
Yes.
You want to start us off, Yaakov?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with really what I'm trying to accomplish here. One of the biggest issues that I've seen personally is, I mean, people say this all the time, but in this area particularly, misinformation is huge, and I don't actually think it's people's faults. I think in a lot of ways, when you don't live the experience, it's very hard to know what it's actually like being transgender, what issues you actually face, and what we actually care about. If you don't live it, you're not going to know. And what that has caused a lot of problems for me. And what I want to do here is demonstrate that people like me do exist. Like Rabbi Schwartz was stating, transgender Jews that love Judaism, grew up in Orthodox communities, want to continue being Orthodox or religious in some way, want to learn Torah, follow halacha. And I want to demonstrate how that can be done because I'm not a rabbi. That's the truth. I don't have those expertise. You have so much knowledge that I don't have. And you're not trans. So I can bring that perspective hopefully. And I really think that it can be a partnership as opposed to some kind of conflict, which is how I've seen it presented a lot of the time. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you and maybe get closer to some answers that we've been looking for.
Well, thank you, Yaakov. It's really thrilling to have this conversation as well. And I really appreciate your framing because I think that in all areas, when somebody's asking a halachic shaila, we really should be striving for conversation and listening and collaboration and really understanding the realities that the person is presenting and finding themselves in, and working together to find, the best solution. The rabbi obviously brings his or her halachic expertise, but the shoel or shoelet, bring their reality, a lived reality. And certainly I'm aware that sometimes, the rabbi who has been responding to you either was not aware fully of the reality or not interested in being aware or came with an approach that was, maybe, not compassionate, not sympathetic. And so I really hope to be able to model something different. And I want to say on your side also, sometimes rabbis that are trying to help in this area make mistakes. They misspeak. Maybe they said thing in a way that somebody might find offensive while they're trying to be helpful. And and it's so powerful when it feels as a collaboration and as a partnership and not like policing or anything of that nature. So I really just appreciate the whole approach that you're bringing to this, and I hope that we can model.
Amazing. So the first thing that I want to talk about is this is kind of a big question, but it has so many different implications in Jewish life. And that is like the big word identity. And a lot of times that's like we see people saying like biological sex versus gender identity, like um, which is sometimes used like you see in a lot of Jewish spaces that there's sort of a rejection of this idea that identity has any merit when defining where you belong in in practical halacha or in Jewish spaces. Um, and we're learning more and more that identity is actually very important. For trans people, there is a lot of science that backs up the fact that we're not making stuff up. This is a very real process that we go through. Identity, how we identify is very important to who we are, and not identifying according to our gender that we're drawn to can be very detrimental. And so the first practical situation that I'm going to bring up is one that I've encountered so many times. I think probably every trans person has thought about it, encountered it, probably spoken about it before, which is what you do in shul, right?
Mhm.
So in Orthodox spaces generally, there's mechitza, right? There are two sides. And the first question is, where do you go? So I have been very lucky to have a community that is pretty okay with me being on the men's side, which is huge for me. I've also been kicked out of shul when other shuls. I have had experiences where I've been kicked out for trying to be
Mm,
on the men's side.
mm,
Um, and I think that this is a really good example, and I really want to hear your perspective on this. This is a really good example of something that is more of a cultural question, right? What does someone look like? If it looks like they're on the wrong side, then we have a problem. But
mhm.
I haven't heard many halachic issues with, me as a trans man being on the men's side or a trans woman being on the women's side. But
Right.
I want to hear from you what you think some halachic specific parameters could be.
Sure. So as you're right, that is sort of the question that runs through so many of these issues. And I'll also say, the fact, starting with the shul example, it's also in a way that the issues around, trans individuals sometimes can be different than around gay people, not just because their realities are different, their questions are different, but also in terms of the public and private nature of the question. So many of the trans issues are about how we, as Rabbi Schwartz said, how we have gender segregated spaces in shul. How do we count people to a million? Who do we call up? All of those types of questions play out at a very public communal level, specifically for trans people. So, and I think it's also for that reason that that there can be such a sense sometimes of real rejection and alienation. I know shows where they'll tell a trans man, you can't sit on the man's side because you're really a woman, and you can't sit on the woman's side because you look like a man. So it's basically you can't be here in this show, right? So, and that's horrific. Like, what type of a statement is that? That here's a show that cannot find a place for a person who wants to be here. So in terms of like how that plays out, some of the like groundbreaking work on this was done by a contemporary rabbi by the name of Eden Ben Ephraim. He wrote a work called Dor Tahapuchot, and I think his basic, at sometimes he's not always very, doesn't always strike the most sympathetic tone. I actually think that he has a hidden agenda to be extremely responsive and inclusive, and he strikes a different tone in order to make it more acceptable for people to the right of him. But that's another conversation. But the work, I think the important work that he does is like, the first question is like, can halacha recognize trans identity? Like, that a trans man, just say that you're a man, end of story. And that's a very big challenge, because halacha seems to very much focus on genitalia in terms of that basic definition. And and nowadays, I mean, better than I do, that people doing surgery, bottom surgery is very, very tiny. And so that really seems to sort of almost say, so where are we going to go? Now, he does raise the possibility that, he points to the fact that in halachic literature, or in also Kabbalistic literature, there's this idea of people speaking about being a man's soul trapped in a woman's body, or a woman's soul trapped in a man's body. And that sounds so much from what I've heard about, the trans experience. And that actually exists like hundreds of years ago in halachic and Kabbalistic literature. And he actually asks the question, well, maybe halacha should be defined by your soul and not by your body, because ultimately it's your soul that has, makes choices and has will, and maybe we should look at the gender of your soul and not of your body. So he raises that, and it's really exciting to think about the question of like, could halacha ever get to that point? To say that, despite genitalia, we're going to define somebody's gender, by their soul. And how would you know what that person's soul is? But anyway, that's, I think, a place where it's exciting to think where halacha might be able to get, but he doesn't go that far. And I'm sorry if this is sounding a little too much like a lecture, but I have to like lay some groundwork,
I want to hear it.
Okay, I need to like lay some foundational groundwork. So but the groundbreaking thing that he does is he basically says what you defined as a difference between society and halacha is, he says some halacha are based on societal realities. When I was growing up, the difference we would use, I don't think they do this now, is the difference between gender and sex. Right? Gender is how somebody appears, and sex is like their, more like their biology and genitalia. So just to use that's probably not the precise usage anymore, but just to use that for a moment for convenience, he basically says most halachas that we know about men and women are based on sex, are based on, are you defined as man, defined as woman, obligation and mitzvot, other types of things. But he says there are some halachas that are based on, he doesn't use this language, but I will, based on gender, based on just societal realities. And he explicitly says which side of the mechitza you sit on, that's a question that you want to create a separate gendered space. You don't want to have a co-ed space. You want to have a space where of separate genders, and it doesn't feel like the mixing of the sexes. And he says that's totally about how somebody appears and what their societal identity is in terms of male or female, and not in terms of this, more sort of classic halachic definition. And he gives a whole list of things which would focus on, what I'll call, again, gender, but would focus on societal identity. And for example, questions about, yichud, like going into private, between a man and a woman. Other questions, we can get to it, about getting an aliyah. Many, many things he says are really based on the issue of societal identity, and not about halachic, more like biological identity. So the short answer is yes, he would say sit on a men's side if you're societally a man, and sit on women's side if that's your societal identity. And that is exactly what I tell all of our rabbis to do. And I think, thank God, there are a lot of Orthodox shows that basically say sit on the side of the mechitza that conforms to, that works for you.
So there are a lot of things that you brought up just now that I want to address that I really like. So first of all, the distinction you made between um, a trans person and a gay person. Obviously, there are a lot of differences. They're different things entirely.
Right.
But we do belong to the same community, and we are seeing a shift in how the Jewish community is responding towards trans people versus gay people. And I think your point about um, private versus public is a really, really good point. I think that's like really hitting on something. Um, I cannot be trans in private because the whole point of me presenting as a man is a public endeavor, right? The whole point is this isn't about like I want to have a personal relationship with. This is about how I want the public to see me. By definition, I can't keep this private. And a gay person shouldn't have to either.
Right.
Definitely not. Um, but ideally for gay relationships, you should be able to, you should be able to have your partner and live your life just normally, just like anyone else. It shouldn't matter, right?
Right.
For a trans person, I need you to recognize that I'm a man
Mhm.
because that is the entire point of my identity. My identity relies on how society perceives me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if if they say, oh, well, which is something that I've been told, which is like, okay, at home or like in other spaces, do what you want, but here in our institution, you can't act like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think some people really think that's a solution, not realizing that what makes me a man is living in the world as a man, right?
Mm.
I will
Mm.
not like I will not enter an institution if I have to dress as a woman or if I have to say that I'm a woman. Um, and no hard feelings. I just won't do it because I can't,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that contradicts who I am. It contradicts what I need for my own mental health. And it contradicts, according to like the last point you were making, contradicts what my soul is. If
Mhm.
if we're going with this argument that I have a male soul, which I think is really interesting, that you're sort of saying like there are two perspectives we can take that are backed up by two different types of halacha. There's the idea that I have a male soul, which could make a lot of sense. Like that could be a stand-in for psychology that we're understanding scientifically, my brain is different in a way. Um, and but then so that is innate to who I am. And then the other piece about how my gender is what I am in society, which
Mhm.
is the
Mhm.
argument that I usually make, actually. And my favorite example to use is I like to say, if family adopts a child, it's their child. Now, it might not be biologically their child, so yeah, tell the doctors that they need to know, but no one else needs to know because the societal,
Right.
it's this you fulfill the societal role of being that child's parent, and that's all that matters. Um, and I am fulfilling the societal role of being a man. So and the other so this is actually leading into the other point that I was going to bring up even earlier, which is by saying that we're going to go according to biological sex, which there are a lot of different areas where a lot of different institutions will say we're going according to biological sex. Not only are you not allowing trans people to live as themselves, but you're requiring them to share their biological sex, which is an
Right.
incredibly personal and private thing. That is
Right.
something I'd like to keep private, right? If
Right.
like if you want me to be trans in private, then I would like to not tell you about that part of myself. I don't want to, that's the part I'd like to keep private, right? Which is really interesting that trans people are often asked to share very invasive, asked to answer very invasive questions about their bodies, how are you going to have children, things like that. I've been asked this by adults all the time. Very inappropriate. But then at the same time, it's inappropriate for you to just appear as you are.
Hmm.
Um, and so this actually leads into the next practical question, which is, okay, so you're in shul, right? And they're counting for a minyan.
Hmm.
So most places that I have been in would not count me for a minyan.
Hmm.
And I've complained about this before. It's something that I think about a lot. I struggle with. I'm not sure even what I would do. Like, I don't know if I would count myself for a minion because I understand the issue. It doesn't appear on its surface
Right.
to fit the halachic standards of, a Jewish grown male. Um, but then another factor that a lot of people don't consider is especially if I'm going to a new minion or if I'm if it's a spontaneous minion in an airport in like a random place,
Right.
they don't know who I am. For them to know not to count me, I have to out myself,
Right. Right.
which is it can be dangerous. It could be
Right.
uncomfortable,
Right.
right? And I have to do that. I have to think about whether or not I'm going to out myself every single time.
Right. Right.
Um, and so this is the next question I'm going to pose to you, which is I want to know at what point do you think that safety and protection
Hmm.
is enough to say go ahead, you don't have to disclose that
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
trans. That's one. And two, if my rabbi personally says it's fine, you can count for a minyan, their rabbi might not. At what
Hmm.
point can I
Hmm.
say, well,
Right.
I don't have to tell them
Right. Right.
because this is a personal thing, or do I say, well, their rabbi might say no, so just in case to make sure that according to their halachot, they don't like unknowingly
Right. Right.
miss out on the opportunity to have a minion. How do I gauge that? Because I have had this question so many times. Like this has happened to me
Yeah.
a number of times, and it's probably one of the most stressful issues that I face, which isn't even, let's face it, it's not even transphobic. It's not people harassing me. It's not people, like kicking me out or anything like that. It's me having to make this choice that is very
Right.
difficult because I don't have any halachic framework for it.
Right. Right. Wow, thank you for that. And a lot of questions there. We all have a lot to respond to, everything each of us says. I want to say one quick thing about the point you made about comparing it to adoption and societal realities. Because, if you think about it, it's a fascinating parallel that never occurred to me. Halacha never developed the concept of adoption, right? There's no halachic category that if you adopt somebody, they are halachically your child. And yet, halacha figures out how to adjust all these other halachot to reinforce that societal reality. So how do you get called up for an aliyah, which is a question, for trans people as well, right? And all these other types of things, which basically we try to make all the halachas align with that societal reality. So that's a fascinating parallel. I really have to think about that more. In terms of how central this is, of course, to your identity and what it means to have it affirmed or denied, I think that's part of the reason why, this can just be so tremendously alienating more than so many other things, because you're basically being told like a piece of who you are is you're being asked to sacrifice it or to deny it and so on. So that's really really I think central to all of this. As far as the halachic question about minyan goes, so let me first, the hardest thing is what you asked about, like, if people might poskin different than I do and rule different than I do. Let me first just talk about the issue itself, okay? I have definitely had this question from rabbis in the field, and the answer I give, and I have spoken to other major poskim who actually agree with this approach, is that there's an opinion amongst the Rishonim that a woman or a minor can count to the 10th of a minyan. And actually, even though it's initially articulated as the 10th, the logic is not limited to the 10th. The language actually there is Kol Be'asara Shechina Sharia. Any gathering of 10, the Shechina is present. But it's it's kavod shamayim that it be mostly male. Or so I'm not going to get into sort of the elevating of the male there, but it fundamentally is but that in any gathering of 10, the Shekhinah is present. And even though we don't rely on that, as and it can be very painful when you have 9 men and 1 woman, and he's actively not being counted as a minyan, and then you're waiting, here, for like some bar mitzvah boy to show up, and this woman who's a PhD or a doctor or whatever, like he doesn't count, but this bar mitzvah boy, now we have a minyan. That can be extremely painful, and so and there have been times where people have counted a minor for a minyan, but not done a woman. So that's like a really sensitive area. And with all of that, being said, there is a difference in that for, because Orthodoxy has so much been defined by defining a minyan as 10 men, if a woman isn't counted, it could be extremely painful, but it's also affirming her gender identity within these Orthodox realities, whereas for a trans man not to be counted, it is denying their gender identity. So what's at stake is really a lot bigger, or different, I should say. I don't want to minimize at all the issue for women. So I think that relying on these Rishonim and counting trans men, and it also has the benefit, in addition, what I said of like it's about denying or accepting identity, and therefore it plays out differently. It also has the benefit of not going against Orthodox norms, because as far as it looks like, we're still counting 10 men. We're not going against what everybody knows. Orthodoxy counts men and not women, and so on. So that's in terms of a basic halachic approach to that. I'll say 1 or 2 more things about that quickly. One is that Rav Yaakov Emden actually says that the only reason that we don't count women towards a minyan is because since they're on the other side of the mechitza, they're not really part of the same group, in the same way. So once you accept that a trans man is on the men's side of the mechitza, it solves that problem. So there's a nice halachic basis to say count for a minyan, and I'll take that 1 step further, which is a lot of halachot that distinguish between man and woman do it based on a pasuk that says ish, ish v'lo isha. When it comes to counting for a minyan, the Gemara never cites a pasuk. The Gemara isn't even explicit that it's only men. It's just assumed to be that way from the Rishonim. And, and it could very well be understood that going back to our earlier point, it's much more about the social reality of being a man, not the biological reality, because it's not based on a pasuk. So there's a lot of, I think, very good reason to say that a trans man can count, and that definitely is what I paskin to those who ask me about that. I wanted one last point, and then get to the hardest part of your question, which is I also think that. And this, I think, might be helpful. I'm interested to hear what you say about this, because I can imagine there could be something affirming about what I'm going to say, which is, halacha also, and this gets also like, do you have to out yourself and talk about what's private and so on? Halacha often makes assumptions and asserts realities based on what is external and what can be seen. And if you take the case, for example, for minyan, the halacha is that a minor doesn't count, and to be an adult, it has to be 13 years old for a boy and have 2 pubic hairs. But we assume that if the boy is 13 years old, he has 2 pubic hairs. We just assume that we don't ask. So then the question comes up, well, what if the boy knows that he doesn't have 2 pubic hairs and he's number 10, right? Should he go and tell the rabbi, you're getting this case, right? Should he go and tell the rabbi, hey, you can't count me, right? And the post would say, no, he does not have to tell the rabbi that. They don't just say because it would be embarrassing, but because they basically say halacha defines you based on what's observable, at least for this halacha. And for this halacha, we're just going to assume that that's the reality. Even if you know that the reality is different, you have no obligation. So,
can I just add to that?
Sure.
I'm curious what you think of, because I've often thought that it's a very similar case to when someone is in the process of converting. they're learning halacha, they look and act like a Jew, but they haven't completed the conversion process,
Right,
right? And then they have to tell someone, hey, I'm actually not a Jew yet. You can't count me for a man,
right,
which is kind of a similar case. It's something personal. It's not something that you might want to
right.
disclose. Um,
Right. So I want to make a distinction
yeah.
between those because the reason the poskim are saying it here is not like because it's personal, we're just going to like ignore the problem. But it's actually saying something different. They're saying halachically, what we're going to define as adulthood is going to be based on what we can observe. And we're not going, even though in principle it's based on something private and two pubic hairs, for the purposes of halacha, certainly halacha is relating to minyan, we're just going to define it based on what we can observe. So it's not about saving this person the embarrassment and therefore ignoring what the halacha requires. It's defining what does it mean to be an adult for these purposes. And for these
Right.
purposes, it means just being 13 because we
This would
assume
be
the other thing.
this is even going so far as to say that not just, oh, I don't have to tell people that I'm not a man. It's saying, no, I am a man because
Exactly. So then the
I
analogy would be
I
if you
appear
appear
and present
male,
myself as a man.
halacha is just going to assume that anybody who walks into shul and appears male is male. Right?
Okay.
That if we assume anybody who walks into shul and bar mitzvah is halachically an adult, then we assume that anybody that walks into shul and appears male is male. And that is for the purposes of all halachas relating to shul. That is our. So I think that there is a lot of nice ways to sort of move forward with this. That I will tell you that you didn't get to this question yet, but some of this could play out in terms of the issue of, let's say, being a shaliach tzibur, right? Because if it's based on this principle that, okay, maybe halacha, you're still, doesn't recognize your male identity, but you can count women, in principle, and here we're going to count, etc., then that won't solve the problem of being a shaliach tzibur, which at least within the Orthodox traditional halacha definitely requires being a man. But if it's basically like, no, we're just going to say that for halachic purposes, for show purposes, anybody who appears male is male. That's the halachic definition. The same way we say that anybody who appears as an adult is an adult, right? Then that actually would have even broader ramifications beyond just the minyan. So this is a novel approach of my own, but it feels to me a very powerful one, because it exactly says like, so sometimes halacha is going, and we have a basis for it, like with this issue of adult, is going to say we're going to base our definitions on what we can see and on those societal realities. So that's, in a way, the easier part, because that's like you're asking me, if somebody asked me my halachic position, what would I say? And I think that there's a really not multiple ways in halacha to sort of to base this. In terms of the question you asked, it is so difficult. I want to start by about outing yourself, being outed. I want to start by saying that there is never any justification to out somebody in any way. It is completely like a violation of kavod habriot, mevayish b'nei chaver b'rabim, any type of thing that is private and personal and somebody is forcing to be public is like such a horrific violation. I'm reminded of the Gemara where there's a story of David HaMelech, after his sin with Bathsheba. And he says that the mockers, he would be walking down the street and the mockers would say, "Hey, David, what's the sin for committing adultery?" And David would say, "The sin for committing adultery is that you're chai of Misa, but you have a portion in the world to come. But somebody who is mevayish b'nei chavero b'rabim doesn't have a portion in the world to come." So I think that, first of all, there are some people, and I've heard horrific stories about this, who are like, "Oh, this person, everybody thinks that they're a man, but I know that they're trans and we can't count them as a minyan, and I'm going to tell the rabbi, and because I have to protect, the sanctity of the minyan." The degree of violation that person is doing is horrific, So even if that person thinks that you don't count and you can't say Dvarim Shebikdusha and the whole thing, it's like there is no justification to be mevayish, but it is so much better to just let people do Dvarim Shebikdusha than to do the horrific act of outing somebody who does not want to be outed and sharing that type of information. So that's what I would say to all the people that are trying to be so holy and protecting of the system. But that doesn't answer the question of what are you supposed to do, right?
Right.
So that's all very nice if
That's
somebody
what I was gonna
asks.
say. Like, that's great. That means I'm safer in a way if people listen to that. But it also almost puts more pressure on me because then it really does mean like I have to make this choice. And
Right,
it's
because like, should I, in the
yeah,
end, the question is still by walking into this shul, if I know that, they would not follow this halacha, then I am unwittingly making them count me, and it's something that they would not want to do. And do I have a right to do that? Um, I so struggle with that question, meaning, again, if it's the rabbi, like let's say the rabbi came to me and said, Rabbi Linzer, there's a trans man, nobody knows, he spoke to me, I appreciate your psak, I want to count him, but not everybody in this community would be happy with that position. It's like, well, tough luck. Like you're the rabbi, and and you don't have to always inform people about the halachic decisions that you are making. I said, if you ever want to, not particularly about this case, that at some time say, listen, there will sometimes be, how we count people in the minyan relates to things that are private and this and that, and it is nobody's business but my own. I am your rabbi, and I am going to make those decisions, and I'm not going to share anything private. But so again, if the rabbi is consulting with me, and the question is, some people in the congregation might not know. Well, listen, they've chosen him as their rabbi, and he's in his rights to make to use his halachic authority, even if he's not consulting with them. But again, I keep on avoiding your question because it's the hardest.
it's
you
it's
know, for
difficult. It really
it
is.
really is. And I don't know if I were in your shoes. I can't, whatever. It's not fair to even imagine that. But I don't know if I were in your shoes, if I would just say, like, I don't want, if I thought somebody would rather not daven in a minyan than daven because I am there. And,
And they
um,
never know.
and they would never know, but they would but they would but in some objective way they would rather not
Mhm.
have davened with a minion.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would then go. I might decide like, okay, I'm not going to go to that minion. It's not fair for
Well,
me
I
to
think
make them
so.
do something they wouldn't
The
want to
most
be doing.
difficult, the most difficult situation I had with this was when I was in an airport and there were like a couple families together and they saw that I was Jewish. I appear very Jewish, and they asked me to join the minyan. There were exactly 9 men and then me, and someone was saying Kaddish. It was an
Mhm.
airport. No one else was gonna come, right?
Right,
I was literally their only way to say
right,
Kaddish, and I
right,
froze. I didn't know what to do because I'm like, I mean, there's a very good chance that they would not like to count a trans man.
right,
But also, how do I even say no? I mean, like, I would appear like a jerk, you know?
right,
Like, I
right,
don't even know
right,
how to, I don't
right.
even know how to
Look,
do that.
sometimes people, this is such a hard question, but I would say sometimes people would rather not know. Like, I think in that case, they rather would have counted you and not know than to know and not be able to count, and feel that they weren't able to count you. And I think that, if you're in a place where somebody needs to make Kaddish, and look, you're never going to know how people are thinking, how they're feeling, or whatever. I just don't think it's fair to like unwittingly make somebody do something that they would not have wanted to do. Again, when you're not dealing like with the rabbi who's a recognized authority who they're relying on,
Yeah.
but in this case, I think I would say like look, they probably, if you're asking me, they probably would rather not know and would rather say Kaddish. So I think in
Mhm.
that case, I would stay
Okay.
around.
I
But
appreciate a number of things you're saying because one thing, I really like that you're using the language of like if I can assume that this group of people would probably prefer to not have a minion with me included, because that is very true. There are definitely a lot of communities where that is the case, and when I have a feeling that is the case, if I can, in this case I couldn't, but if I can, I will say like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom, wait for like another man to show up, and then come back, something like that. But what I appreciate is that you're not using the language of honesty because I've had some people say to me,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, you need to be honest about being a
Mhm.
trans man and not a real man, right? And you're
Mm.
lying to them otherwise." Um, and I find that very problematic because I'm
Mhm.
not lying by not sharing personal information. I'm not lying by saying I'm a man.
Mhm.
I am a man. I'm not maybe the type of man they think I am.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it is true that I'm trans. That is the truth. But that's personal information. I'm also not sharing my medical history with them. No one
Right,
would expect
right.
me to. And if I was sick and I didn't want to share that because it was personal medical information, I probably shouldn't go to a party, right? But I don't have to disclose why. So
Mhm.
if I need
Mhm.
to quickly, hey, like I'm gonna like go to the bathroom and like come back when there's a
Right.
minion, right? I don't have to share why. But I can deduce, okay, these people would probably prefer a minion without me, so I'll wait for a minion to come first when I can. I also really appreciate this is going back to earlier what you were saying about the difference between women and trans men being counted in a minion because this is something that I've had an issue with before is because I'm like, how can I be asking for rights as a trans man before women even get those same rights?
Mhm. Mhm.
Which is something that I struggle with a lot. And before I realized I was trans and got into trans advocacy, that was a really big thing for me. It still is a big thing to me. It's just not what I focus on because I'm not a woman. I'm no longer part of that community, so I can't really contribute as much as I could before. But I think that is super important is, halacha in terms of women being involved and all those different things. But there also is a big difference between what it means for a woman to be excluded from a minion, what it means for a man to be excluded from a minion. Because there are a lot of reasons why it feels gross to not be included. For a woman, it's degrading, it's very uncomfortable. Like you said with the example of like they're waiting for a minion and a woman is right there, but they have to wait until like a 14-year-old gets there, right? And you're like,
Right.
seriously, it's horrible. We need to figure something out. Like that is definitely something that I support. But for me, it's not, I honestly don't care so much about feeling like I'm good enough or I'm, being respected enough to be an minion. For me, honestly, it isn't about respect. It's about, am I a normal person part of this community? Right? When we
Mhm.
talk
Mhm.
about, and this was the next thing I was going to talk about, like leading and laning and those things. It is really, really sad that a lot of women never get those opportunities. And that is a really difficult thing. And it's difficult for me too that I don't get that opportunity. But it's so much easier than not being included in Minion because a lot of people don't lead and don't lane. They sit back in
Mhm.
shul, they do their thing, they daven, they chat, it's fine, right? I I'm a nerd. I'm a Torah nerd. I would love to lane.
Mhm.
I enjoy it when I can, but that is an opportunity. Being included in a minion is being treated like a normal everyday person.
Mhm.
When I'm
Mhm.
ex
Mhm.
excluded, you're telling me I'm either not part of the community,
Well, a
sometimes,
normal everyday man.
or I was gonna say, or you're telling me that I'm not a man, which are
Right.
both painful, right?
Right.
Both of those are painful things, and that's why, like, when I go to shul, even though like the minion here, they know that I'm trans. They know not to. The Orthodox minion knows not to count me, which I've respected. That's fine. That's their decision. But that means that I always show up after there's a minion because otherwise I'm standing there and they're going, okay, like one, two, oh, skip him, right? And then
Right.
go on.
Right.
And
Right.
there are they don't have to do that with the women because it's a completely
Right.
different story. It's another story that's important, but it's a different story. So I really appreciate that distinction.
Thank you.
And that this is a case where it's not about an opportunity or privilege that I want. It's about being treated like another everyday man
Right. Right.
and
Could
being
I
treated like the person that I present myself as, that I act as, that
totally,
I live as.
totally. Could I ask a question from what you know? I mean, I assume you have, like, you know, trans women. Do you, and I don't think, you know, not to presume to speak on behalf of others, but do you think like it's affirming for a trans woman to not be counted in that scenario where there are nine men and a trans woman and she's not being counted? Is that like, does she, I mean, I'm not saying does she like
Yeah.
not being counted,
So
but is there
I
something affirming about that?
I am not a trans woman, obviously.
Right.
I do not speak for trans women. I can tell you though that I have I do have friends that I have spoken to who have had that experience where for some people it is also really sad because they're losing something, but they would I have heard from people, okay, I'm not speaking on behalf of
Right,
anyone. If
right,
anyone wants to also like put in the comments like if you have an experience with this, but I have definitely heard from some friends that not only is it affirming when not counted, but when they are counted, it's very it's like what are you doing? Like I thought we
right.
established I'm a woman, I'm part
It's
of, I'm on the
it's
women's
rejecting
side,
their
this is who I
identity.
am.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's fun to be counted, but then you're not acknowledging my reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I've also had friends that are even
Right. So
closeted.
just to repeat that point,
Mhm.
it's not about, and goes back to your point about aliyot or leading. It's not about I want a privilege and do I have a privilege or not have a privilege. It basically is the simple question of identity. And
Yeah.
if I'm a trans man and you're not counting me, you're denying my identity. If I'm a trans, and again, we neither of us need to speak on behalf of everyone, but at least
And
what some people have reported is if I'm a trans woman and you
mhm.
are counting me, you're also denying my identity.
And I'm not saying that that is the intention
Right.
of whoever is making that decision. A lot of people
But it's
say
the effect.
we
It's
think of
the
you as a man,
effect.
but we just can't make decisions. That's fine. But at the end of the day, that is the position that I'm being put in. So
Right.
either they have to find a solution, which we don't have a good solution. I'm going to be completely honest with it. Like we don't
Hmm.
have a perfect one. Or I have to take on myself, okay, I have to figure out when to get there so I come after there's already a minute or
Right.
something like that.
Well, I
Um,
gave you, what do you mean we don't have a solution? I gave you four good reasons why we can counter trans
you gave me reasons, but when there's a case where someone doesn't
doesn't pass
like a
that way.
trans
Right.
man, like there isn't much I can do about that, right?
Right. Right. I know.
Um,
I know.
but I did appreciate what you said about like in a case where we know that most likely the congregation would not include a trans man, and then I am in this position where I have to decide what to do. I really, really appreciated that you said like you don't actually know exactly what to do. Because first of all, every case is different. And second, I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation, even today, like even like in 2026, is still kind of taboo, which
Hmm.
is really sad. But that means that we've had so little time to come up with any answers, right?
Hmm.
And I would be very suspicious if you kept saying, "Yeah, I know exactly what to do." Right? Which is what sometimes when I have talked to some rabbis, they've said,
Hmm.
"Let this is the answer. I know exactly what to do." I'm like, I don't trust
Hmm.
that because I don't think you have all the answers, and I'm not asking you for all the answers.
Hmm.
I'm expecting to build something, to work on something that we can keep improving, and in a few years we'll realize, oh, that was really stupid answer. Well, let's think about something else, right? That's what I want. Um, and like immediately whenever a rabbi says I don't know, I'm like, okay, then I can trust you. Like that means there's humility. It means that you like want to keep, it means you want progress. It means you want to keep moving forward. You want to keep getting more answers. And it also means that you recognize that I have an entire life that you can't entirely understand, and I can do my best to share it with you, and you can do
Hmm.
your best to share the Torah with me. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be a little bit difficult.
Right. I so appreciate that. And it really gets back to the opening theme of collaboration, and just also, and your openness to this and your openness to be thinking about it together and not to be insisting about like, I need everything answered the exact way I want it right now. So I think that's really just beautiful, how we're working together on this. And I just,
Yeah.
we hope that could be a model, going forward.
100%. Yes, this is like my goal is for people to realize like if only we could work together, which we
Hmm.
can. Like this isn't a difficult thing to do when you're willing to do it. You know?
Right. Yeah.
When you're willing to sit down and have the conversation, we can move forward, we can get answers. Um, so I want to address the questions I have asked you so far have been based on the community. And I want to that is a really important thing. I mean, community is a huge thing in Judaism, and how the community perceives you, how it treats you, um, how it identifies you is very important. But I want to sort of shift slightly into individual relationships. So, when it gets to not where are you sitting in a shul or what you are being considered in a shul, but who to again to individual people, who am I, which affects Shomer Nagia, right? Can
Mhm.
I shake their hand? It Yichud, right? Can I be in a room with them? And then of course, like in the secular world, we love to talk about bathrooms. It's a favorite topic, which is like kind of in between individual and communal. But
Well, that in sports.
yes, but I'm not athletic, so I feel like I can't really speak on that. Um, like that one honestly does not affect me just because I don't do sports, I can't comment. But but I think it is like I almost think the mini question is like the Jewish version of the bathroom question because it's like okay, you're in the men's space, first of all, and what is your status, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, the reason trans people want to use the bathrooms according to their gender is because we want to seem like normal people. If I walk into the women's bathroom, every time I would have to be like, hey guys, actually, the reason I'm here is because I'm a trans man, so it's fine. And like,
Mhm, mhm,
you know,
mhm,
I
mhm.
just, I don't care so much about which bathroom I'm using. I just want to be a normal person. And that's why I just want to be able to walk into shul, go on the men's side, you know, join the minion, everything's fine, no questions asked.
Right.
Um, but getting into again the individual, um, I really want to hear your perspective on Shomer Nagia and Yichud, especially because we already
Mhm.
have discrepancy where that's not it's not so universal in Orthodoxy. Like some people already are like, oh, I don't care.
Well,
And
the,
it's
the the
interesting.
halacha is clear, but not
The
everybody
halacha
is
is
so
clear, but
is
culturally,
is keeping it
because we
right.
always see a discrepancy between the halacha and the culture. Because
Right.
a lot of time it's not necessarily the issues with trans people aren't necessarily the halacha, they're with culture. In this case, I've actually
Right.
seen people be more lenient than the halacha.
Mhm.
Um, I've had lots of men walk up to me and like deliberately shake my hand to prove
Mhm. Nice.
that they accept me. Um, Meanwhile, I've taken it upon myself because I don't want to assume what someone else is comfortable with. I will never start out by like, giving someone my hand. Like I will wait for
Right.
them to offer to shake my
Mm,
hand and then I'll
mm,
shake
mm,
it back.
mm,
But I don't
mm,
want to put the pressure on them.
mm, mm.
But I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about
Sure.
this. Because
Sure.
especially because before we were saying, okay, well, it might not actually be about the body. It might be how you're perceived. It might be something like
Mm.
that.
Right. Right.
But in this case, like if I shake someone's hand, that's
Yeah.
my body,
Yeah.
right?
Totally. Totally.
So
So
I'm
yeah.
actually really, really curious about
Sure, totally.
yeah, about
And
what you have
I
to say.
also, I don't, I should let's let people know. The moderators have asked me, let people know that we're going to stop the conversation, try to wrap it up in 10 minutes, like at five after, and but there's been a lot of questions, so hopefully we'll be able to address some of those at that time. So I will say here, again, this author who's really Haredi, this posek, Eden Ben Ephraim in his book, Dor Tapuchot, has addressed most of these issues, and he exactly um, says that here too it is the social realities and the social identity that dictate. First, I should just say in one sentence, because you mentioned getting an aliyah, that he actually also says that a trans man can get an aliyah because he says the only reason a woman doesn't get an aliyah is covenant tzibur, and we know that's been a whole discussion about partnership minyanim. But he says, but if the person looks like a man, then there's no covenant tzibur issue. So he has no problem with a trans man getting an aliyah. Leading Chazar Sashatz or whatever, that's, as I said, a more complicated issue. But to your question, his basic argument, first of all, here's the thing. If we were to totally focus on a question of well, let me take another step. Let me think of this. So these halachot are mostly based on issues about, sexual attraction and what leads to sexual thoughts or where things might go sexually and so on. And halacha, besides having a gender binary and all of that, is also this, won't be a surprise to you. It is heteronormative, right? It assumes that sexual attraction is only between men and women.
I was going
And
to
which
say this issue is actually very much connected to the experience of gay Jews.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, at one level, if you're somewhat of a formalist, like just going by the rules, it's like, okay, halacha is heteronormative, so doesn't matter if I'm attracted to, if I'm a man attracted to another man, there's just halachically, there's no yichud, right? That's the halacha. There's no yichud between two men because halacha just assumes heteronormativity, and the same in terms of touch and all those types of things. So in this case, the assumption that the author is making, which I realize is not always the case and is important to point out is not always the case, is also that a trans man is attracted to women. Somebody could be a gay trans man and a trans man attracted to men, right? And the same reversed by women. But if we're just going to go by the types of normal assumptions halacha makes, so once we are saying like, well, societally you're male, and it's the societal realities that are relevant for questions of sexual attraction, that's ultimately what's relevant. So basically says, so you're male, so we're going to, I mean, he doesn't spell this out the way I am about the heteronormativity. It's somebody basically says. So, societally, you're male, you function as a man in society, and that means that we're assuming that you're attracted to women. So that means that there's no problems of negia or yichud with other men. That's basically the approach that he takes. And I'll just add one thing to that, which is because since you raised the issue of negia, I'll use this as an opportunity completely unrelated to the whole trans discussion to just clarify something, which is there's a general perception that there's a rabbinic problem of casual touch between men and women who are not married to one another. And that if you're going to, a man will shake a hand with a woman, it's because of some justification of kavod habrios, et cetera, et cetera. The actual halacha is not that way. The actual halacha is that if it's not sexual touch, and there is no formal prohibition. There's no formal isser. If there's a concern that it'll lead to sort of, I don't know, sexual thoughts and this and that, it should be avoided. But fundamentally, if it's neutral touch, there's no prohibition at all. I understand that that's not how most people think, but that is the halachic reality. Moshe Feinstein is very explicit about that. Anyway, so even just from that perspective, the real question to be asked is like, is there, is this a sexually charged reality in terms of the negia issue, and not the question of male versus female. So I think that's really the more relevant question to ask. And I wouldn't be concerned about the minion issue, because this is so much about ultimately rooted in questions about sexual attraction. That if you're perceived of as a man, you don't have to be worried about shaking hands with a man and touching the body and et cetera. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh my God, objectively speaking, I touched somebody who halachically is defined as a woman and that's a violation. Like, that's not how it works. Ultimately, right. This really is rooted in the issue of attraction. If a man is attracted to me,
they're gay.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't even
right.
Because I like, if you're saying if it's sexually charged because I appear as a man,
right.
Definitely in this case.
Right. That would be then something to pay attention to. If there would be a man who would be attracted to you, and if, because, if there was some sexual attraction there because, whatever, then that would be something to pay attention to. But the objective male-female question here is not really what is relevant.
So I think it's interesting because you're saying that because halacha is very heteronormative, it would be assumed that I, would be attracted to women, which is not something I've ever heard before, that as a trans man, I must be attracted to women, right? Normally I hear it the other way.
Right.
But so that brings up the question, and this might be our last question because I know we're finishing up. When one day I want to get married, start a family, does that mean that I could go through a halachic wedding, marriage, completely recognized according to halacha with a woman, right? Me as the man and a woman.
Right. So there, the answer, at least where halacha is now, is a clear no, because that is not an issue of sexual attraction and it's not an issue of societal. That really is that halacha defines marriage as between, somebody who is let's say biologically, halachically, biologically male and somebody who's halachically, biologically female. Whether somebody wants to try to advance, an argument that, around the sort of societal categories there should be relevant. But I think that would be a very, very uphill battle. So that's just in terms of the issue of kiddushin. Now, that is different from the question, right, of having a chuppah, of creating a
I
house
was going to say, because
together.
we've seen like what we have seen is um a lot of gay couples that
Gay
have
couples, exactly. So whether
found
there's
many different
kiddushin,
ways to
exactly. So whether there's
get married.
kiddushin is
Love
one
it.
question, right? Whether but that's different from the question of being embraced by the community and having a
Right.
chuppah and
Of
raising a
course.
family. Those are very different
It's
questions.
always a different question.
Sure.
What can I do according to halacha and what can I do that will keep me
Right,
accepted in the community? They're very, very different.
right, right. It's very, very true. But
So
this is just preventing, making certain brachot. If you want to ask, what does that halachic fact that it's not recognized kiddushin mean? What it basically means practically is not being able to make birchas erisin and the sheva brachot. That's the practical implications of that.
So this is a great conversation. I'm sure we could go on for many more hours. I just want to point out very quickly for everyone, both here and those that are going to hear the recording, to notice the respect and the humility and the kindness and the compassion, the rachamim, that both Rabbi Linzer and Yaakov come to this conversation with. This notion of thinking intentionally about how we engage with each other, how we walk in the room is so important. And Rabbi Linzer has given us wonderful historical and textual context. Yaakov has shown us this incredible maturity well beyond his years in terms of dealing with such complex issues and thinking about how he lives. So I'm going to try to do the best I can in condensing a lot of questions into a few so that we get some substantive conversation. Some of the questions I've answered, you've seen that, the ones that either we're not going to be able to answer here or are sort of just in a different bent. I want to focus on a couple of things. One of the areas of questions is about when transgender individuals do not pass. That if someone Yaakov walks in and sits in the men's section, and again, it's up to you. And you brilliantly shared this complex calculus that you do in your own head about whether you count yourself in the minyan or how you handle that. What do we do, Rabbi Linzer, when people are either in transition or clearly do not look like their affirmed gender identity? How do we help them on their journey in a kind way without throwing them out of the community or making them think chas v'chalila that they don't have a place?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Is this is this specifically around mechitza? Are there other specific things that you
I
would sort
think
of
it's
ask us
other
about?
things. It's many. There were a lot of questions about this.
Okay.
How
If you could
somebody
give me
appear.
some specific things beyond the mechitza aspect, would it
Yeah.
like
Okay. So for individuals who identify as binary, were assigned female at birth and appear as a man, and they go to the men's side in the shul. Um, Also about another question was how do you address the case of a transgender man or transgender woman who is socially transitioning but might not pass as appearing
right?
to be male or female?
Right. Yeah, I got that. I'm just trying to think of
Before
practical
That's the
applications.
general.
before
Okay,
you
so
answer the
I'll
question,
start by mechitza. I
can
think
I just
that
make a quick comment?
sure,
Sure,
please.
I just want to say, because I think this is really important. I'm really glad this apparently many people have asked this question
Yes.
because like I want to make it really important to note that when I say that I'm talking about my experience, I'm really saying I'm talking about my experience. Like I know that there are so many different issues that aren't being covered here because they don't necessarily apply to me. I am binary, which like the fact that I'm a trans man as opposed to non-binary, or the fact that at this point in my life I pass has huge implications. Um, and so I think like I'm really excited to hear what Rabbi Linzer has to say about these cases, but also like this isn't going to be able to address everything. And I'm really hoping that even though we can't include everyone in this discussion, this can be like a really good guideline or format to be able to further the conversation in different ways when it applies to you specifically and you have different things that I wouldn't have even thought of. So that's
Right.
just what I want to say, but now
Okay.
I want to hear the answer.
So I'll start with the mechitza, and as I was, and I'm well aware of that. And as I was talking about, well, if you look male, then you'd be on the man side of the mechitza. Like, well, what if you don't look male, but you're still a trans man? Or so, and there's also the whole question about queer individuals, right? Who maybe, however they look, they don't want to be either on the male or the female because they have a problem with the binary. But we're not that, we'll leave that for another program. I would say that, you know, I don't think, I think if somebody is sort of looking somewhat like androgynous, not, I'm sorry, again, if I'm misspeaking or, not being fully sensitive, but anyway, but, it's not like if somebody is appearing in a way that really like says female, then it is a problem being on the men's side of the mechitza. But if somebody is somewhere in the middle there, and it's not like the men's side has to feel like male. It just shouldn't feel mixed. It shouldn't feel co-ed. And if this person feels like is a little different, well, learn to be tolerant of a little diversity. There's some places where if like you're not dressed in a jacket and a hat, then we don't want you in our show. If you don't look really male, we don't want you on the men. There's no need to do that, right? I mean, I realize some people might feel that way, but I really think that as long as somebody is somewhat not obviously belonging on the other side from those social norms, is not appearing in that way, then just accept that not everybody looks exactly the same here. You're not feeling that as a man, that you're in the same space with a woman. And I think that's what the real question would be. That might not cover all cases, but that's what I sort of feel is the dominant point here. In terms of the issue of the minyan, which is, I guess, another relevance, some of the things I said, well, if you look male, halachically, you count as male for a minyan, that would not apply. But other of the things, which is like using the principle that women can count towards the 10, or like if they're a minority of it, or especially if it's a case like this where you're on the man's side of the mechitza, that would still be relevant for this case. In terms of the issues that Yaakov and I were just discussing about like yichud and negia, again, as long as somebody is not presenting really as the opposite sex, if I'm a man and this is somebody who's a trans man and they're somewhere in the middle, but they're not presenting really female, then it's not a problem, I think, with the yichud and the negia. I think the problem, so the only thing that I think would be really hard for halacha to deal with is somebody that really, presented really clearly as female, but was identifying as trans man or the reverse. That would be hard.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's passability is definitely like it's a very difficult thing because it's very random whether you pass or not. It has to do with so many different factors, but nothing to do with like the validity of your gender, right?
Totally.
It has to do with your genetics and how much money you have and this and that.
Exactly.
But like it has nothing to do with are you actually the gender that you're claiming to be? I will say that I think so in my personal opinion, I think that we're kind of lucky in the religious Jewish community because we have specific indicators. Now, this can be difficult for some people, right? This can be an issue because, for example, when they don't want to let me wear a kippah or they want to force me to wear a skirt, that's a huge issue. But when it comes to passing, like part of the reason that I pass so well is because I wear kippah and tzitzis and they don't even think twice, right? So I know that's
That's really such
not
a good
always good
insight.
enough, but I
Wow.
will
Yeah, yeah.
say we have those indicators. So my personal advice like to people would be like take advantage of that. And if you're confident, right? And you like and people look different, right? Like not everyone looks the same. You don't have to look like the perfect man or the perfect woman and people might clock you and that's scary. It is terrifying being trans. I get it, but take advantage of the fact that we have those indicators, and even if someone clocks you, they're going to know what you're going for, right? And as long as you're in a community, like maybe be careful in a place where they'll like kick you out or something, then like think about your safety and stuff. But if you want to like to communicate that you are the gender that you want people to recognize you as, like really take advantage of like of those indicators that the community has given us because they work. They really, really work.
That
So,
is
so
so insightful. I so appreciate that.
that was amazing.
I
So
do want to say, Yaakov, if I could just say, I imagine it's a little easier with those indicators as a trans man than as a trans woman,
That is true.
because the absence of an indicator is not as much of an indicator as the
Well,
presence
okay,
of one.
if you're going to
by the
village
way, I
school
just,
as a trans
Yaakov,
woman, wearing
Yaakov,
a skirt
wait,
helps.
I just want to say
I
one
will
thing.
put that out there.
That's very funny because we did get a question exactly like that about a trans woman who has some trans women friends who want to be counted, who don't want to be counted,
Yeah.
who it right, it
But no, so it's in general, for some reason, trans women tend to have it harder. There's more stigma around it for some reason.
Mm,
There are a lot of things, and I do think it's more difficult. The one advantage that I think trans women have here is that, in this case, they're not trying to be counted in a minion or trying to lane right there. It's so when you're trying to not be involved in something, that's a
mm,
little bit easier. But then, of course, some people still won't want you to be on that side of Mechitza if
right.
they, realize that you're trans. But like, there are things that, um, for me, like I actually kind of love the fact that Judaism has such clear gender binaries because it makes it so easy for me to indicate my gender, right? They see which side of the mechitza I'm on. They see I have a
Hmm.
kippah. They see my tittis. They like they get it. They
Hmm. Hmm.
understand. And I actually think some Jewish people understand being trans more than in the secular world. Because secular world, they're like, what are you doing? Like, you can do anything, it doesn't indicate your gender. Judaism, they're like, no, if you do that, then you're a man. Obviously, because, you know, that's
Right.
that's the only possible explanation. Um, so I'm just that is something else that I'm gonna put out there.
all right, so we're going to move on a little bit. The next area that we got a lot of questions about are in terms of safety, in terms of outing people, like what you were talking about, Yaakov, earlier, about do I out myself and say, well, do you really want to count me in the minion? Do you? And I always tell people all the time, I say, you need to give your medical information to your doctor. That's it. Everything else is
Hmm.
a choice.
Right.
Yes.
But the idea of safety, the idea of being able to live the life that people live. It has to be said, Yaakov is a very unusual, I think, young man in terms of what Yaakov has gone through and how he has just exhibited such incredible aplomb at claiming his place as a Jewish man. I don't know that everybody else, um, I don't know that a lot of folks can do that. But the issue of how do we ensure the safety? How do we respond to the transphobia that's out there? How do we acknowledge this cultural, political, social reality in which we all live and protect our transgender folks? That's one question. And I'm just going to put a second one out there because of the way the conversation goes. The second one that's come up a lot is I'll just condense it into this one question. Can we understand transgender Jewish folks as fundamentally, in terms of gender identity, latchila, that at some point they were misgendered for whatever reason and had to correct it? And do we have a way to sort of look at these folks as, somebody asked, isn't this a matter of pikuach nefesh? And yes,
Mhm.
and mental health, absolutely. Um, Not cosmetic surgery. It's much
Right.
deeper than that. So
Yeah.
just to respond to that area of questions.
So
So I think, Yaakov, I'll let you answer the first one because I don't
yeah,
have that much to add.
because I have a lot to say about the first one. especially because I appreciate like, saying like, oh, like I'm a very remarkable person, even though everything I've gone through, like that, like I thank you. But also, I have been through I've been through a lot. There have been times when I didn't feel safe and I had to back down, and that is really important. Um, it sucks. That like I'm just gonna be like really clear. Being trans is difficult for a lot of different reasons, partially because of the world, community, transphobia, and also partially because it's a hard thing. Like you're doing a lot. It is a difficult thing, and sometimes that means things are going to suck and you have to put your safety first. I have had to leave shuls before. I have had to back down. I've had to lie, like, and especially before I had was before I was this far along in my transition. I had to be like, okay, fine, like I'm just a girl, whatever, go with it. Um, it's not fun. And so my advice would be put your safety first. If, if someone doesn't want you there, then don't be there, not because you don't deserve to be there, but because you deserve better than to be harassed and excluded and, disrespected. If like they're losing out by not having you, they don't deserve to have you there. If, you know, that can be an institution, that can be a specific place. Now, sometimes we don't always have the ability to leave a place. That can become really difficult. Then you have to figure out, you have to weigh the different options. Am I going to continue to insist that this is who I am? Am I going to back down and say, okay, fine, whatever you say? And that's a really difficult thing they have to figure out. But like, there are two things that are really important, your identity and your safety. And both have to be considered. So that's the first thing. Um, and then the other thing that I'll say is, well, okay. I'm trying to decide exactly how I want to word this, but so like I'm saying, like you have to protect yourself, but you shouldn't have to always be in that position in the first place. And I'm not like usually we don't put ourselves in those positions. Usually we find ourselves in those positions. Every day you're going to, have to make those choices. Am I going to go to this place or is it too dangerous or like risk analysis? You always have to figure that out. But overall in your life, you should be working towards living in a community where you don't have to protect yourself on a daily basis. And it's not just your responsibility, it's also the responsibility of communities to be safe, and it's also the responsibility of institutions to protect you. And it's not fair how much responsibility is on us individually as trans people to figure that out, but you owe it to yourself to be in a community where you don't have to fight. So when you're going through your, daily, like you go to shul and go to school, like you're going to face decisions that are very difficult to make, and you have to weigh both your identity as who you are and safety. And also, you should really like if you find a community that feels safe, go for it. Like it is not your job to fight. Um, that's part of why like I chose the college that I did because I was like, okay, like that is somewhere where I don't have to fight. Um, and I think that is really important. And just one more thing is just because you have to weigh both safety and your identity doesn't mean that by choosing to stay safe and protect yourself in any way it diminishes who you are and what your identity is. You know who you are just because sometimes you have to give in for your own protection and not not always stand up for yourself as much as it sucks. That doesn't have anything to say about who you actually are. It just means that the community has a long way to go and you're being hurt and it's not fair. Um, but sometimes the best way to move forward is by losing the recognition of your identity. You're still who you are, but the recognition so that you can stay safe until you can get to a community that accepts you for who you are. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with everything Yaakov said, totally. And just to repeat what I said before, like nobody should ever feel whatever people say, you have to be honest, this, that. Nobody should ever, ever, ever feel that they have to out themselves, reveal something private that they do not want to be revealing. If for reasons like we discussed, you feel would it be fair to have people come? He said, fine, don't go, figure it out, whatever it is. But whatever situation, maybe you can't get out of the situation and they're going to count you anyway, but you should never feel that it is, that you have to out yourself. That should, nobody should ever feel that they have the right, so I'm repeating what I said before, but, to out anybody. So that's number one. I mean, that would be a horrific violation. And it's also the rabbi's responsibility to create a community that is, that sends signals. And it's not just about halachic rulings. It's like, what is the education? What is the culture? What are the signals that are being sent, in terms of, whether it's the shul, whether it's the school. There's a responsibility of creating a certain type of an institution and a culture in which people can really be safe and know that they're safe. In terms of the second question, Yaakov looks like you want to
One more
respond to that.
thing
Yes.
is just also in every institution community that you find yourself in, find the other queer people and ask them, what can I do? What's safe? Who can I go to? They'll know. Find those other people. Find the people you can trust. Get that information, and then that's how you make your decision. That's like always first thing that I do.
Great. So, and in terms of the question of the lichatchila, so you actually said the lichatchila and the pikuach nefesh. Those are actually not the same thing at all. Pikuach nefesh is a big override, and would sort of say like that gives us justification to not worry about the fact that the halacha category of the halacha is right here at this point or whatever, because there's a bigger thing at stake of pikuach nefesh. But that is not halacha recognizing, the gender identity. That is halacha saying like we're gonna make it work for you, just because of the pikuach nefesh concern. So that's a whole question, like when do you play the pikuach, what I'll call the pikuach nefesh trump card, and when does halacha really recognize something that has that degree of weight? I will say that 98% of the things are at the derabanan level and do not need the pikuach nefesh argument. But in terms of the lichatchila question, I think that that's part of. I addressed some of that in my sort of our initial exchange, which the opening, which is so there. There are two paths right now that are trying to sort of move forward. One is what this, this Sefer says, Edom and Ephraim, about your soul. Kabbalah speaks about a male soul caught in a woman, a body, and vice versa. That has to do, Yaakov, you translated that as like psychology or whatever. A lot of it has to do with a belief in the transmigration of souls. So like you were a woman in a previous life, and now your soul is in a man's body or vice versa. A man in a previous life and his soul came back and it's now been placed in a woman's body. But at the end of the day, what it would say is that even though we assume somebody's soul matches their body, maybe if there's a lot of evidence that that's not the case, the person is willing to deal with all of the societal hardship and marginalization and, everything that's involved because of their trans identity, then maybe that's an indication that this person's soul is different from this person's body, and therefore halacha can pay attention to that and can say we're going to look at the soul and not at the body in this case, because it's clear that the soul doesn't match the body. Again, there's a lot of halachic work that would be needed to say that, but that would be a path to try to go down. The other path, which might sound similar, but it's a little different, is the one, it's not so metaphysical, is the one that that my colleague, one of the Rebbeim at the Yeshiva, Rabbi Yisachar Katz, has argued, and he wrote a tshuva about that, and actually will be coming out in a book of his tshuva, which God willing will be published, sometime in the next few months. Is that to see that the fact that halacha looks at genitalia, that the genitalia is not definitional, it's more of an index to the person's identity. So by default, we will assume, you spoke, Yaakov, about an index like, the kippah and the tzitzit, right? So the genitalia is the default index to the person's identity, but maybe if there's enough evidence otherwise, we can understand that the person's identity is different than their genitalia. So that's the other type of argument. So anyway, there are these attempts to try to say, like, is it possible to really, really fully embrace the gender identity, not just sort of say the social aspects as opposed to the other aspects. But there's a lot of, halachic work yet to be done.
Okay. I think we may have time for one more question very briefly, and then I'll just close this up. We're going to run a few minutes over, I do believe. We had some questions around traditionally gendered mitzvot, such as candle lighting, challah, tefillin. When somebody transitions, or as I say, claims their affirmed identity, their core identity, do you take that on a case-by-case basis? How do you negotiate that? That kind of goes with another question where a trans woman wrote that some of her trans women friends want to be counted in the minyan, some don't. I mean, there are those variations. And I think just as Yaakov has spoken with great clarity about his identity and about what it means to him, I think some of our transgender folks may not have that clarity in terms of what it means functionally in their life day by day vis-a-vis mitzvot that they're used to doing. Do you have any advice for that, Rabbi Linzer?
Wow. So thank you for that. And, and it's really important. Again, this is why it's so important to hear from people and understand their reality, because my assumption would have been if somebody's trans man, they want to do everything like a man. Trans woman, they want to do everything like a woman. And that's not necessarily the case. The first thing I'll say is that a wide range of those things are not exclusive. A man can light Shabbos candles. A woman can put on tefillin. I mean, again, whether, okay, societally, blah, 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 but halachically, the biggest issue halachically about doing certain mitzvot is doing it on behalf of somebody else. So a woman can't blow shofar for me, a man. Fine. But like if a woman wants to blow shofar for herself or read Megillah for herself or whatever. So I would say we'd have to go through them, but like 95% of those doesn't matter. You can be one or the other. There's nothing stopping you, from doing those other mitzvot. But in terms of, where somebody is basically said, let's take your case, I'm a trans woman and I don't want to be counted. Another person, I'm a trans woman and I do want to be counted. Um, wow, that's like a really tough one. And it sort of gets to this question of, are we seeing every trans case as an exception and an accommodation? Or are we actually trying to create new categories? And I think I really, Yaakov, want to hear what you have to say. But it would seem to me that will be once, like most things, there is like a fluidity on a lot of those things, and the things that there aren't a fluidity like on like which side of the mechitza, and counting to a million. I think my gut is we'd be better off communally to say, no, this is the reality. Trans men are men and they're on this side of the mechitza, and trans women are women and they're on this side, and and we don't count trans women and we do count trans men. It's just going to be so, I don't know, disruptive and confusing, and it just makes everybody feel like a special case rather than really affirming a gender identity. So that was a lot of words, but basically I would really say, a lot of those cases you can do it regardless of man or woman, whatever the societal norms are. And when that's not the case, I obviously want to be sensitive and responsive to people, but to the degree that these are communal and public aspects, I think we can't start like giving different treatment at different people. It would be very not a good way forward, in my humble opinion. Yaakov, help me here.
Yeah, okay. So I definitely hear what you're saying. And as someone who wants to, in pretty much every way, be considered a man, um, I definitely like am thinking like, yeah, like it would be a lot easier if like if you're a trans man, you're a man, easy. If you're a trans woman, you're a woman, done. That would be very satisfying. But I definitely recognize that there are people where that's not exactly the case. And additionally, and this is something that I can say from my own experience, it's not just a case by case according to different people. It's also almost every one of us goes through different feelings
Mm,
in our process. And I think no matter what you view gender identity as being, the process of transitioning is exactly that. It is a process and it
mm,
takes time, which means everyone is going to have different feelings at different times and might not be ready for something yet. Um, and I honestly don't have a great answer for that. For me, the like that in between area was not a fun time. But it was sort of I did most of that in the closet, so I wasn't really
mm,
making these decisions out in public. But it was like a step by step, like when I started wearing tefillin privately, and then when I started like wearing a kippah privately, like they were each their own things. And I think that honestly, I think like I have sort of a similar answer that I don't have a great answer,
mhm, mhm,
but um when it comes to I think what the most important thing is that you are able to communicate what your own gender is. I think that is the most important thing. So when it comes to your personal decisions about what mitzvot you want to take on, how you want to go to shul, how you want to present things like that, there it's going to be complicated. And it's difficult to figure out. But I think from the perspective of institutions and communities, the most important thing is that when someone does decide to switch sides of the mechitza, or they do decide that they want to wear tefillin or something like that, that it's understood that that is part of your gender identity, even if you might go back home and, you know, you put on tefillin at shul and but then like you haven't given up the candles or something like that. Like I think the most important thing is the agency that you are able to say, I am presenting as a man in shul, and this is how that needs to be recognized, or I'm presenting this way or that way in a certain area. And it might be that you haven't fully committed or that you are in an in-between area and like this is a difficult thing to figure out like in your own life and
mhm,
it was difficult for me. But like but when I go to shul and I say this is what I am, at the end of the day, that's what needs to be recognized,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
sure.
So that's
Sounds like, yeah,
and there's still gray areas and it's we don't have
yeah.
all the perfect answers for that, but that's what I can add, which isn't
Yeah.
much, but
I think
it's
Sandy, you ended us with a question that clearly we both need to do a lot more thinking about, and I certainly need to do a lot more listening about. And you know, od chazon lamoed, as they say.
Hun, I mean, the way I describe this work, as I say, imagine guys that were flying on an airplane while it's being constructed. I mean, this is where we are. And to amplify what Rabbi Linzer said, what you said, that it's not black or white. It's not that you have to give up these mitzvot. Men absolutely can light Shabbat candles and women can wear. We know all of these things. And I think what happens is when we're dealing with transgender folks and also with LGBT, that whole community, our whole community, we tend to develop this kind of hyper awareness or hyper hysteria
this is a
around
point that it just occurred to me to make that like every person will go through something where they want to do this, they don't want to do this, they have to figure it out. What
exactly.
does the halacha say? What does the rabbi say? We all go through that. But when it's a trans person, there's what that one person decides to do somehow now speaks for the entire trans community, the
Exactly.
validity of gender identity, you know, and there's so much weight put on our shoulders. And
Right.
what I really hope is that we can get to a point where trans people can also be making those personal decisions and go through those difficult times and make mistakes and it not be considered a national crisis of the trans Jew, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Well put. Well put, Yaakov. Well put. Look, this was amazing. I thank you, Rabbi Linzer. I thank you, Yaakov. I thank you, David, Rabbi Schwartz, and our silent partner for this for tonight, Ellie Winkler, who's been our amazing tech guru. I did not formally introduce myself, but my name is on there. I'm Sunny Epstein, and I run the Welcoming Schools project of Eshel. I also do a lot of counseling. I responded to a lot of the questions. I only have 7 open questions out of the original, I don't know, 47. But the one thing is, Rabbi Linzer, you were asked to, can you link the book that you referenced or mention it?
Oh, Rabbi Kath. Oh, the book of Eden Ben Ephraim. Yes, I
Yes.
can. Where do I put in a comment like that?
I'll put it in. If you just give it to me,
Okay.
I'll type it in.
All right. Let me look for it right now. Okay. I mean, okay. I'll send that information to you. Okay. Hold on, I'll find it right now. I should also say that if people want to contact me, like they have follow-up questions, I'm happy
I already
to.
put your email in there. So
Okay, it's
YCT.
Linzer at YC Torah, and people should feel comfortable to contact me. Um, all right. I am looking. I don't know, Sandy, how to find this because I don't know.
What's the name of the author?
It's Eden Ben Ephraim. Hold on, let me see. I'm just typing right now to see if I can find it. Here. Okay, I'm going to send a link from a Sfarim store, so at least And let me.
Rabbi Linzer,
Yeah,
if you click on if you once you've copied that link, if you
yeah.
click on the Q&A at the bottom,
And just
and
type in.
then
Yeah.
Just write it as an answer to one of the questions that are
and
open.
then you can write it as the answer to one of the questions. You can
Okay.
click on type answer and you can put that
Okay.
in.
So I just did that right now.
That'll work out fine.
Awesome.
Great.
Okay,
And
and
we'll
I have a PDF of the entire book. So if anybody wants to
Great.
just email me, I actually think we put the PDF on our website. Let me go take a look.
Okay, good. And people should feel free to go to Parat's website, to Eshel's website, to YCT's website, and find out the programs and the resources that we all have. For Eshel, just a few quick announcements. We are having our first Eshel Parents Retreat that I hope, weather permitting, to be on a plane on Monday getting to Israel. I know, right? That will be not this coming Shabbat, but next Shabbat. And the Eshel National Retreat will be March 13th through 15th at Pearlstone Retreat Center. It's a new location, new time of the year. Parents Retreat will be April 30th through May 3rd at the Pearlstone Retreat Center. We have drop-in groups and programs. Go to our website, get on our mailing list. I did put my email in there a few times. You can certainly reach out to me for resources and reach out to David for resources at Parat and Rabbi Linzer for YCT. And
I want to say I
please,
just posted
okay,
a
great.
link to the PDF of the entire book from our website, and
Perfect.
also a link to our webpage where we have a whole range of resources for the LGBTQ community. And the last thing I'm going to post, and then I won't interrupt you again, Sandy, is my email if people want to be in touch with me.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, so I think you have all of our emails. We want to thank again Parat, YCT, Eshel, and our partners who have brought you this program, Ori Letzedek, Yeshivat Maharat, and Jofa. And I do just want to make a very quick comment that I think this growing consortium of groups that are dedicated to being reasonably religious, being Orthodox, being Shomrei Mitzvot, and caring about individuals and wanting to find a place for everybody is so valuable to all of us. And I hope that these partnerships will continue and that we will bring you more programs with various combinations of these organizations.